What is the strongest possible hacked Pokemon in every single game? Hacking in Pokemon allows you to use impossible combinations of moves and abilities. You can take an overpowered legendary like Mewtwo and give it the best moves and ability possible to abuse its power to the max. But sometimes the strongest Pokemon in the game with hacks aren't legendaries at all, and these top tier choices might surprise you. Let's find out who the most powerful hacked Pokemon are in every single game. But first, important news. Jimothy Cool non-subscribers were recently cited being laughed at and having tomatoes and junk thrown towards them by passers-by. Subscribe to the channel to prevent yourself from becoming a laughingstock to others. Thank you. In Gen 1 you would probably expect the number one hacked Pokemon to be Mewtwo. It's the most powerful Pokemon in the base game, and with every option possible at its disposal, surely this would translate into the world of hacked Pokemon too. But you'd be surprised to learn that Mewtwo is not even good in the hacked Gen 1 metagame. The best hacked Pokemon in Generation 1 is actually Electrode. And the metagame of Gen 1 hacked Pokemon consists of running multiple Electrodes. You're probably wondering why. Well, there's a simple reason. A lot of people probably forget this, but Spore is actually a Gen 1 move. This 100% sleep-inflicting move is among the best in Pokemon history. And it's often forgotten in Gen 1 because the only Pokemon that gets it is Parasect, who has extremely low speed and is generally quite terrible. But with hacks, you can just put Spore on whatever you want. And who's the fastest Pokemon in the game? Electrode. Sleep in Gen 1 is unbelievably broken. There is no counterplay to it at all. Held items don't exist, so there's no Chesto or Lumberry to cure sleep. Sleep Talk doesn't exist. Anti-status mechanics like Safeguard don't exist. And even going for a lucky wake up doesn't work. In later generations, when a Pokemon wakes up from sleep, they can still use a move on the same turn. That's not true in Gen 1. When you wake up, you don't use a move. Electrode will win against anything slower by simply putting them to sleep and hitting them with Seismic Toss or Nightshade over and over. If they wake up, just put them back to sleep and they literally can't do anything. The best strategy against Electrode is an Electrode of your own. When both Pokemon have the same exact speed stat, it is a coin flip to determine who goes first. So Gen 1 Pure Hackmons comes down to coin flips. The only other way to play around sleep is to stall all of the PP on Spore. Spore has 24 PP, so you could theoretically switch to a Chansey or something bulky, and infinitely switch, expending all of their Spore PP until they can't sleep you anymore. Wake up and then beat them. But this is obviously a ridiculous ask. I will personally not be doing this anytime soon. Gen 1 Pure Hackmons might be the most broken format I have ever seen in my life, but things will get more interesting as the franchise progressed. In Gen 2, Electrode is still very good, remaining the fastest Pokemon in the game and having the fastest Spore, but in Gen 2 they introduced actual counterplay to sleep moves. As of Gen 2, Pokemon can use a move on the turn that they wake up. Held items were introduced, one of them being Miracle Berry, which can cure status. It has the same effect as Lumberry in later games. And the move Sleep Talk was also introduced. Sleep Talk will allow you to randomly use one of your Pokemon's moves while sleeping. So while it's still good, obviously, to be faster than everything else and put them to sleep, this does not insta-win anymore. Because of this, Electrode is no longer the number one Pokemon, and the more obvious choice of Mewtwo takes the throne here. Mewtwo is tied for second fastest Pokemon in the game with Jolteon. With anti-sleep tools like Miracle Berry and Sleep Talk, it can just KO Electrode trying to put it to sleep, and its stats other than speed are obviously excellent. Gen 2 introduced a lot more options for Mewtwo to abuse as well. In Gen 1, Mewtwo doesn't actually gain that much from hacks. It already has just about everything it could ever want in the base game. But in Gen 2, that's not the case. You can use tools like Belly Drum, Extreme Speed, Mega Horn, Sacred Fire, Earthquake. Gen 1 was pretty limited in the options for attacking moves of different types, but Gen 2 added way more to abused on hacked Pokemon, and Mewtwo is the best at taking advantage of all these. Gen 3 is quite unique in the world of hacked Pokemon. Abilities were introduced in this generation, but it is actually impossible on Gen 3 cartridge to give a Pokemon a different ability through hacks. If you wanted to give Slacking huge power, unfortunately this is not possible. Pokemon have to maintain their base abilities, but they can use whatever moves they like. There are two contenders for number one Pokemon in Gen 3 Hackmons, and neither of them are legendaries. The first is Ninjask. Ninjask is the second fastest Pokemon in Gen 3 behind Deoxys Speed, but Ninjask has the much better ability of Speed Boost. After protecting for just one turn, Ninjask Ninjask gains a speed stat raise and will outrun Deoxys speed easily. Because of this, Ninjask is the best fast spore inflicting Pokemon. Gaining stat stages from speed boost also has another application. Ninjask can pass speed to its allies very safely, especially with Spore to completely disrupt the enemy from acting at all, granting you free turns to do so. Common recipients for these speed boosts include Groudon and Kyogre, but there is another contender for best Pokemon in the game. Although you can't give Pokemon different abilities, you can remove their abilities. And there is one case where this is especially advantageous. Slacking has the ability Truant. Truant prevents Slacking from acting every other turn, and this is designed as a deliberate disadvantage to offset how great its stats are. But with hacks, you can remove a Pokemon's ability, and Slacking without an ability is an absolute force to be reckoned with. With all the moves in the game at its disposal on top of this, Slacking can abuse Extreme Speed, a priority 80 power normal type attack. Even though Ninjask is faster than Slacking, Extreme Speed can just one-hit KO. With a Lumberry equipped to shield you from a single Spore, Slacking can also set up a belly drum in the face of Ninjask and destroy absolutely everything with its maxed out attack. Mach Punch can also be abused for another powerful priority option, and you can fill out your coverage however you want. Shadow Ball is great to hit ghosts, Cross Chop is a nice hard-hitting fighting type attack, you can just use Spore because it's that good, and some sets choose to use Taunt as a form of disruption. Most players actually think Slacking is a bit better than Ninjask and is the true #1 Pokemon, but they're quite close. Gen 4 hacked Pokemon is a very interesting world. It is now possible to give Pokemon new abilities with hacks, which can create some game-breaking combinations. One of the most famous ones is Guard Spiritomb. Spiritomb is a dark ghost type Pokemon, and since Fairy type does not exist until Gen 6, Spiritomb has no weaknesses. The ability Wonder Guard is exclusive to Shedinja, and grants a complete immunity to all moves except those that are super effective. Nothing is super effective against Spiritomb, so in theory this is an invincible Pokemon that can't be hit by any attacks. And this is a very good Pokemon in Gen 4 Hackmons, but of course there are ways around it. Some moves can bypass Wonder Guard. In Gen 4 and the generations prior, Future Sight works differently. Instead of dealing Psychic type damage, this move deals typeless damage. So that can hit Wonder Guard. It is typeless and it's not affected by immunities. The same is true of Doom Desire, a move with a similar effect that hits a couple turns after being used. And for some random reason, another move that can hit Wonder Guard Pokemon is Fire Fang. This move doesn't have any special effect, it's just a regular old fire type physical attack, but for whatever reason, this is able to hit Wonder Guard Pokemon. Some sort of error in the programming. You may expect Spiritomb to be the best Pokemon in the game because it can become invincible to most things, but actually, not only are there these ways to hit Spiritomb, it's also vulnerable to Toxic and Toxic Spikes, which can wear it down. The best Wonder Guard user is probably just Arceus. Even though Arceus is weak to fighting, that's the only type it's weak to. It's relatively uncommon to see fighting type attacks, and it has much better stats than Spiritomb. The best Pokemon in Gen 4 Hackmons is a bit contentious. Some would argue that it is Arceus, or perhaps Deoxys Speed, but most seem to think that Giratina Origin is actually the best Pokemon. Giratina Origin happens to have a bunch of traits that just work really well in this metagame. Fire Fang is actually a central attack here because it's able to hit Wonder Guard Pokemon, and Giratina Origin resisting Fire Fang is very nice. Giratina also has access to the Gracious Orb item, which is crucial because it cannot be removed by Trick. Trick is common here to disrupt enemies, giving them choice scarfs or other disadvantageous items, but Giratina Origin gets an advantage from the Gracious Orb, enhancing its attacking power, while also providing an immunity to this central Trick strategy. Giratina Origin is also able to block Rapid Spin and is immune to powerful moves like Extreme Speed as well. Blocking Rapid Spin is nice because, as mentioned earlier, Toxic Spikes are quite popular to pressure Wonder Guard Pokemon. And on top of this, the Pokemon is just solid. It's a legendary with great stats, it hits hard, it can use Fire Fang itself to actually hit enemy Wonder Guard Pokemon, and it can abuse options like Dragon Dance and powerful stab moves, and just be great in every regard. So Giratina Origin is the #1 Pokemon here, not because it is inherently powerful on its own, but it's a great response to other powerful concepts in the format. Gen 5 is where things started to get crazy. In the Gen 5 games, there was something called Pokestar Studios, where you could battle against these fake Pokemon that cannot be obtained in the game. But with hacks, you can actually use these Pokemon. And one of the best ones in Hackmons is Pokestar Spirit, who is just a dark ghost type with 100 in all stats. Basically a better version of Sableye and Spiritomb, abusing that powerful dark ghost typing and Wonder Guard. Pokestar Spirit is not the best Pokemon in Gen 5 Hackmons though. Gen 5 saw the inception of one of the most powerful hacked Pokemon in the game, and a central staple of hacked Pokemon moving forward, and that is Imposter Chansey. I made an entire video about Imposter Chansey if you're curious, but basically, using the new ability Imposter, which was introduced in Generation 5, Chansey can immediately transform into its opponent. Imposter copies all of the stats of the enemy except for their HP. The Imposter Pokemon will maintain their own base HP stat, so Chansey will transform into an enemy with way higher HP than they should have. On top of this, the Eviolite boost grants 1.5 times defense and special defense, because Chansey is not fully evolved. So you can transform into something, copying all of their stats and stat stage changes, and having way higher HP and a significant boost to your defenses, which is absurdly overpowered. More counterplay to sleep was introduced in Generation 5 with the ability Magic Bounce, which can bounce back sleep-inflicting moves to the enemy. So fast sleep-inflicting Pokemon started to use Mold Breaker to bypass this ability. Deoxys Speed is the fastest Pokemon in the game, so it is obviously the best at doing this. A Mold Breaker set is great on this Pokemon, and so is No Guard. No Guard makes your attacks perfectly accurate and can allow you to abuse the move Sheer Cold, which has 30 accuracy, but will one-hit KO the enemy. No Guard makes this 100 accuracy, so you can just be faster than everything and KO them. The only real counterplay to this is Wonder Guard Pokemon, who are immune. Gen 5 also introduced another extremely powerful ability that would become a staple of Hackmons moving forward. Prankster. This ability grants priority to all non-attacking moves, and the best Pokemon at abusing this is Base Form Giratina. Giratina has that excellent Dragon Ghost typing and fantastic defensive stats. Giratina can take advantage of Spore with priority on it, which is excellent. You can also use Ghost-type Curse to deal significant damage over time to enemies, especially against Wonder Guard Pokemon, and you can abuse various utility moves like Encore, Baton Pass, Haze, etc. Other abilities like Shadow Tag, Poison Heal, and Magic Guard can also be used on Giratina. And once again, Giratina can use that Gracious Orb as a form of counterplay against Trick, which is useful. Out of all of these, I think Deoxys Speed probably has the strongest case for number one, although it is a bit contentious. But Deoxys Speed is extremely central and commands the rest of the metagame to form around it. Gen 6 Pure Hackmons is actually more widely played than the previous entries. Gen 6 introduced a lot to the game, a lot of new moves, Mega Forms which you can use without Mega Stones, and some really powerful new legendaries as well. This introduced so many fantastic new Pokemon that you can abuse Wonder Guard with. One of the best at this is obviously Xerneas. Xerneas is one of the most powerful legendaries in history, and its simple mono fairy typing makes for a good Wonder Guard user. Fairy is only weak to 2 other types, Poison and Steel, and Xerneas can abuse its immunity by Shell Smashing and Sweeping. It can even baton pass Shell Smash boost to teammates, use Spore itself, remove hazards with Defog, set toxic spikes on the field. You can do whatever you want with Xerneas, really. Another excellent one is Mega Ordino. Mega Ordino has the same 2 weaknesses as Xerneas, to Poison and Steel only, but it has far better defensive stats, making it a bit better in the utility role. Imposter Chansey remains incredibly powerful, of course, as does Giratina. Giratina seems like the go-to Pokemon to abuse powerful defensive abilities with, taking good advantage of Prankster, as Prankster Haze is one of the best and most reliable ways to play around boost sweepers. It can use Magic Bounce, Poison Heal, and even the new ability Fur Coat introduced in Gen 6, which grants doubled defense and is borrowed from the Pokemon Furfrou. Most players that I've asked seem to think Giratina is the best Pokemon in Gen 6 Hackmons. Giratina is the best foundation to abuse powerful abilities with, and with its vast array of different ways it can be used, it's unpredictable, versatile, and central. Its typing is also crucial for rapid spin blocking, Ghost-type Curse, which is a useful tool, and just its excellent general bulk. Gen 7 is where things really got flipped on their head, because some very important new options were introduced. Z-moves can of course be abused by hacked Pokemon without needing to use a Z-Stone, which is absurdly powerful. It's worth noting though that all of these Z-moves only have 1 PP, but they are still very common and popular choices. But what's more important was the introduction of Lunala and Solgalio's signature moves to the game. Moongeist Beam and Sunsteel Strike. These 2 attacks have the effect of ignoring enemy abilities, and they are extremely strong, with a solid 100 power. This crucially allows any Pokemon the ability to hit Wonder Guard users. Dealing with Wonder Guard users just got way easier, and that made powerful offensive Pokemon much better here. Chief among them is Mega Mewtwo X. Mega Mewtwo X has an absurd attack stat of base 190, and you can give it the ability Huge Power to double that attack stat. And with access to Sunsteel Strike, it can absolutely destroy Wonder Guard Pokemon, sometimes in a single hit. Mega Mewtwo X is excellent at abusing Huge Power, but it can use other abilities too, like Magic Guard, which grants an immunity to indirect damage, allowing you to use the powerful Mind Blown and be completely immune to its recoil effect. Mega Mewtwo X can of course abuse tools like Shell Smash to boost up its stats, and Spore because it's very fast as well. And I think it's safe to say that Mega Mewtwo X is one of the most absurd hacked Pokemon that the series has ever seen. But of course, as is tradition, Chansey is equally as good in Gen 7 Pure Hackmons because of how powerful it is to just be able to transform into an enemy. Imposter offers so much to teams, scouting enemy movesets, revealing all of their move choices, their ability, counterplay to boost sweepers by copying their stat stages, and using your enemy's powerful threats against them as you transform into a version of them with higher HP and defense. If Mega Mewtwo X is good, a Chansey transforming into Mega Mewtwo X is even better. Gen 8 was a gen that removed a lot of options from the game. Z-moves were removed, Mega Evolutions were removed, and even certain moves like Pursuit were cut from the game. In some of these other generations, it's a little bit contentious who the number one Pokemon is, with a couple that have a case for it, but in Gen 8, there is no argument. There is one Pokemon that stands tall above everything else firmly, and that is Eternatus Eternamax. This is a Pokemon you're not supposed to be able to obtain in the game. You can only get it with hacks. This Pokemon was a boss fight with deliberately overpowered stats, and it should come as no surprise that if trainers could actually use it, it would be the best thing of all time. Eternamax Eternatus has 255 HP, 250 defense and special defense, 130 speed, but luckily its attack and special attack are only 115 and 125. This Pokemon's defensive stats are so high that it can actually break the entire game and become invincible in its defense or special defense. And forgive me if I get some of this wrong because it's pretty crazy stuff. But there's something called stat overflow, where if you give Eternamax Eternatus a plus nature in either its defense or special defense, it will become so high that it actually wraps back around to 0 defense or special defense. And if a Pokemon has 0 defense or special defense, the damage calculation is impossible, and the Pokemon will just take 0 damage. Eternamax Eternatus with a bold nature, for example, will wrap back around to having 0 defense and will be completely impervious to physical attacks, I think, folks. Forgive me if I have gotten this wrong. And just a quick note, I tried for about an hour to recreate this on Pokemon Showdown only to discover that it seemingly was never implemented. I'm using Wonder Guard here to illustrate it, but in actual cartridge, this stat overflow glitch would make the Pokemon completely immune to either physical or special attacks. Because of this, the metagame consists often of multiple Eternamax Eternatuses on your team, and the strategy seems to consist of just sitting there and fishing for one-hit KO moves to land. Finally, we're here in Gen 9, where a lot of good new moves were introduced for hacked Pokemon to abuse. Last Respects was infamous in competitive singles for being absurdly broken. This is a ghost-type attack that gains 50 base power for each fallen ally, achieving ridiculous amounts of damage output when your entire team has fainted. And another great new option introduced in Generation 9 was Revival Blessing, the first ever Pokemon move that can revive an ally. This works similarly to the revive item in the game, bringing a Pokemon back to life and restoring 50% of their HP. The move only has 1 PP on it though. In Gen 9 you can actually use Mega Forms again too, with hacks. In Gen 8, Mega Forms are not in the game's files at all, but in Gen 9 they are. Even though you can't use Mega Forms in the base game, they exist in the game's data. So Mega Ordino has returned to its former glory as an excellent abuser of Wonder Guard, but the best Pokemon in Generation 9 Hackmons is probably Regieleki. This guy was released in Gen 8, and it dethroned Deoxys Speed as the new fastest Pokemon in the entire game. Since Regieleki is the fastest Pokemon, it can hit you with Last Respects or get a crucial Revival Blessing out there before its enemy. Regieleki is pretty good at using Wonder Guard actually. As a mono-electric type, it is only weak to ground, so it will be immune to most attacks in the game. And some other popular abilities on it include Shadow Tag to trap the enemy with you, and the good old No Guard plus Sheer Cold combo is still solid on this Pokemon as well. So there you have it, folks, the best hacked Pokemon in every generation. Pure Hackmons is obviously extremely chaotic and unbalanced, where games will come down to speed ties a lot of the time. There is a lot of PP stalling, and centralization around mechanics like no guard plus one-hit KO moves, and Wonder Guard, granting complete immunity to most things in the game. But there's still some fun to be had in these formats. I think the best of them, in my opinion, that I've played is probably Gen 7 Pure Hackmons, because you have the Z moves available, which are very fun, and there's a surprising amount of variety in what you can use. Gen 7 Pure Hackmons is actually playable on Pokemon Showdown on the ladder if you want to give it a try. These formats, of course, have their problems, especially formats like Gen 1 Pure Hackmons, which is just the 50-50 Electrode format, and Eternatus Eternamax kind of ruins Gen 8 Pure Hackmons being so absurdly powerful that nothing else is even close to being as good. But there is something fun about using the most powerful possible Pokemon that you can, with no restrictions whatsoever.